What does a blowtorch, drywall, and burnt wood have to do with sanding? Today's video is going to show you one secret you need to know about getting flawless, swirl-free finishes in your wood projects. You might be asking yourself, what does some broken up drywall, a blowtorch, and burnt wood have to do with sanding wood? Well, stick around. I'm going to show you one secret to getting swirl-free finishes in your sanding project, and you can use this on anything. It doesn't even have to be wood. Hope this helps. So what this is an old automotive trick. It's called a guide coat. When you're refinishing or finishing automotive and you're sanding the primer and you want to see low spots, or you want to see areas that you haven't sanded through to the next grit, you're going to use a guide coat. You apply a uniform layer of something that's a different color than your primer, your base coat, or your paint. And if you're trying to sand out swirls or see low spots, when you've sanded the whole area, if you're sanding it flat, you'll see the areas that haven't been sanded. If you're trying to get swirl marks out, moving up to the next grit of sandpaper, it'll show you the areas that haven't been sanded, and you'll get coloring inside of those swirl marks from the guide coat that's been applied. So how are we going to make this guide coat ourselves? If you're going to buy it, it's pretty expensive and it's really pretty simple to make. So I'm sanding some darkwood walnut TV stand today, but I'm going to show you how to make this for light wood as well as dark wood. And the easiest way to do this for the dark wood is drywall. I'm going to crush up this drywall, and we're going to use that as our guide coat. It's going to become a fine powder that's going to stick to the wood, and it'll stick inside of the swirl marks, because drywall, if you know anything about drywall, the dust is impossible to get off of anything, which is what we want right now. It's going to stick to the wood, and it's fine enough that it's going to stick inside of the swirl marks until we get up to a fine enough grit that you can't see the swirl marks anymore, and at that point you're not going to have issues with it. This is going to be the difference between like 120 grit up to 220. To get rid of those swirl marks and ensure they're gone, you apply this at 120 and then start sanding higher grits, and you'll be able to see them as they disappear. And I'm going to show you that later on in the video. And then I'm going to also show you on lighter wood, on a piece of birch plywood, I'm going to burn and make some charcoal with this piece of wood, which we're going to apply to that as well, and it's going to do the same thing. So stick around, I'll show you the technique, and hopefully this helps you guys get a flawless finish in your work. So for the lighter wood, to make some charcoal, I'm just going to use this blowtorch, and I'm going to char the inside of this bowl I made, and then I'm going to use a drill bit to scrape it out into one of these containers as well. So there I've got my black guide coat, my white guide coat, and if you stuck around this long, watch a little bit further and I'll show you how to use these, and I'll give you a exaggerated example of how these are going to show you your sanding scratches that are left in your boards. So I've sanded both of these pieces with 80 grit sandpaper, and this is going to exaggerate this example for me. But what you're going to do is take some of this and I'm just going to spread it over the surface. And what this did, I'll give you a close-up shot after I get them both coated, is highlighted the swirls that were there. And the same with this charcoal that I've made. I'm going to take some of this and rub it around, and you've got to get, I didn't crush this up as well as I should have, but there you go. And so I'm not going to do a very good job of spreading them around, but I'll give you a little insight into this. So if I get a close-up on this, you can clearly see those sand scratches in there that you couldn't before. On this lighter piece, it's a little bit harder. If you look carefully, you can see them, but I'm going to show you an exaggerated example now. I'm going to go from 80 grit sandpaper to 220, and this is really going to show you the sand scratches that you would have missed if you had done this and not had a guide coat to see. And so it removed most of it. But if you look closely again here, you're still going to see white swirls where most of this should have been sanded smoothly if that was from 150 to 220. And again, this is a little bit darker, or a little bit harder to see. I really should have crushed up that charcoal better. But now I'm going to go back, I'm going to sand this with 120 and then give it a guide coat and then 220. And we'll see what it looks like after going through the appropriate steps and how the finish is with that. And so here you can see I've sanded this up to 120 this time and applied the guide coat. And on this piece, there isn't really any visible swirls in it, but it's filled some of the grain in and it just looks a little bit lighter, which is good. That's going to also give you the indication of when you've sanded through it. On this piece, it's the same thing. It's got grain that's a little bit shallower. There's no visible swirls, but this is still going to act as a guide coat for sanding when that dark spot is gone. And when this wood is lighter and you can no longer see the white spots in the grain, you're going to have sanded through to the next grit. So let's give it a shot. As you can see here, there's no light spots left on the wood, and if we look across it, it's smooth, looks good. It's got a matte reflection in it, no swirls, and that was 80, 120, 220. I skipped grits between 150 and 180. It took a little bit longer than it should have. And then if you look at this birch ply, it's removed that entire black area. There's nothing left in between the grains, and this is smooth as can be. And if you've sanded like this, you're not going to have any swirl marks left because you know that you've removed that entire layer of wood with the next grit of sandpaper up. You have nothing to worry about. And if you don't skip grits, like I skipped grits, I went from 80 to 120, 120 to 220. If you're going to use 80, 100, 120, 150, 180, 220, you're going to be able to go through the grits faster than this. But this was just an example of, to exaggerate it, go from 80 to 220, you can really see the swirls that are left. Go from 80 to 120, no swirls, use the guide coat again. Go from 120 to 220, and you can get a perfect incredibly easy without having to, waste time sanding more than you would need to. You're going to know exactly when you've taken off that entire layer.